After a billionaire CEO releases his autobiography, he gets a visit from a little girl. "Sir, you forgot to put mommy in your book." He smirks, amused. "And what did your mommy do to deserve a place in my book?" Only to freeze in shock at the little girl's response. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from, and please like this video to support the channel. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Romeo Calloway had spent years perfecting his image. Every interview, every handshake, every strategic move had led him to this moment, standing in a grand ballroom filled with adoring fans clutching copies of the Calloway legacy, eager for his signature. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and champagne, the kind of luxurious celebration he had grown accustomed to. His name was everywhere, printed in gold on banners draped over marble pillars. A bestseller, naturally. People loved an underdog story, and he had given them one. Rags to riches, risk to reward, struggle to success. The polished, curated version of his past, delivered in a neat 400-page package. He had just signed another book when a small voice cut through the hum of conversation. "Sir, you forgot to put mommy in your book." Romeo barely glanced up at first, expecting some doting mother behind the child, maybe an overzealous fan hoping to tug at his heartstrings. But there was no one. Just a little girl standing there, gripping the book like it held the answers to the universe. She couldn't have been older than 7, her dark curls slightly frizzy from the humidity, her expression steady, almost expectant, as if she had rehearsed this moment 100 times. He let out a short breath, more amused than anything. "Did I now?" He capped his pen, leaning back in his chair. "And who might your mother be?" The girl tilted her head. "She's the part you left out." That got his attention. He sat up straighter, studying her more carefully. The media, always on high alert, had caught on. Cameras shifted, flashes flickered. Someone whispered. He could already picture the headlines. He rested his forearms on the table, keeping his tone light. "What's your name?" "Lily Monroe." The name landed like a quiet thud in his chest. Monroe. His mind ticked through old memories, but nothing came immediately. He didn't flinch, didn't let it show. "And what makes you think your mom should be in my book?" Lily lifted her copy, flipping to the dedication page. She tapped a tiny finger against the words "for those who stood by me." "Because you said this. And you forgot her." The room had quieted. People were watching now, waiting for his reaction. He could feel the weight of their curiosity pressing in, the speculation forming before he could even decide how he felt about it himself. He kept his response measured. "That's quite an accusation." Lily didn't waver. "It's not an accusation. It's the truth." Before he could respond, a woman in an event staff uniform approached, gently resting a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Sweetheart, let's not disturb Mr. Calloway." Romeo was about to say something, he wasn't sure what, when Lily shrugged off the woman's touch. "I'm not disturbing him. I'm just telling him what he forgot." Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and walked away, her small frame disappearing into the crowd. The event resumed, but Romeo barely registered the rest of the night. His hand moved automatically as he signed books, smiled for photos, answered questions, but his mind remained fixed on the girl with the impossible certainty in her voice. He should have brushed it off. Kids said things all the time. Yet something about the encounter gnawed at him. Later, in the back seat of his car, he stared at the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. He told himself to let it go. Instead, he pulled out his phone. "Noah," he said as soon as his assistant picked up. There was a rustling of papers in the background. "Boss, I hope you're not calling to yell at me for leaving early. I was drowning in rich people and oversized shrimp." Romeo ignored that. "I need you to look into something." "Define something." "A kid named Lily Monroe. Find out where she came from." There was a beat of silence before Noah whistled. "The one from the signing? That was gold. You should have seen the look on people's faces. I don't care about the press. Which is why you want me to dig into it." Noah said dryly. All right. I'll see what I can find. Who's the mom? Romeo hesitated. That's what I need you to find out. There was a pause before Noah spoke again, tone laced with amusement. I know that look. You can't see me. I don't need to. You get this weird, thoughtful silence when something actually gets to you. Romeo exhaled sharply. Just find out. Noah chuckled. You got it, boss. The call ended, but the unease didn't. The next morning, Romeo arrived at his office early, pretending he wasn't waiting for an answer. He buried himself in work, pushing through meetings, emails, an endless stream of numbers and projections. But every so often, his mind wandered back to Lily's small voice, to the quiet certainty in the way she had said, "You forgot her." By noon, Noah strolled into his office, a manila folder in hand. He dropped it onto the desk with an exaggerated thud. Well, he said, flopping onto the couch. You're not gonna like this. Romeo opened the file. The first thing he saw was a name. Charlotte Charlie Monroe. The air in the room seemed to shift. The name pulled him backward, unraveling years in a single instant. He could see her, wild, sharp, relentless. The woman who had once been the closest thing he had to a home. The one he had walked away from without looking back. Noah smirked. I take it you remember her. Romeo closed the file, fingers pressed against the cover like it might burn through his skin. Where is she now? Noah stretched, looking entirely too entertained by the situation. Small bookstore, decent neighborhood. No scandals, no dirt. Just a quiet life. Romeo tapped a finger against the desk. And the kid? Noah shrugged. Lily Monroe, 7 years old. Lives with Charlie. No record of a father. He leaned forward, eyes sharp with curiosity. So, boss, wanna tell me what's so special about her mom? Romeo didn't answer. Instead, he stared out the window, jaw set, pulse a little too steady for his liking. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the fact that Charlie was back in his orbit, or the fact that, for the first time in years, a question lingered in his mind with no clear answer. Who exactly was Lily Monroe? And why had Charlie never told him about her? He stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Noah sat up. Where are you going? To get some answers. Romeo had spent his life mastering control. Controlling his image, his success, his story. But as he sat in the back of his car, staring out at the city that had made him, he felt something shift beneath his feet. The name in the file sat like a stone in his chest. Charlotte Monroe. Charlie. A name he hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade. He had been 24 the last time he saw her. Freshly stepping into success, finally making a name for himself, his ambition outweighing everything else. Charlie had been there from the very start, back when his dreams were just scribbles on napkins and late-night rants about the future. She had believed in him even before he did. And still, when the opportunity came, he had walked away, telling himself that love and success couldn't exist in the same space. That she would only slow him down. He had never looked back. Not once. Until now. The car pulled up to a small bookstore nestled between an old cafe and a thrift shop, the kind of place that belonged in a postcard rather than the ever-expanding city skyline. The large window had a display of handwritten recommendations and an old wooden sign hanging above the door. The bell jingled softly as he stepped inside, and the scent of old paper and vanilla drifted toward him. It was small, intimate, the opposite of everything he had built for himself. And yet, as he stood there, taking it in, something about it felt familiar. Then he saw her. Charlie stood behind the counter, flipping through a thick hardcover, completely unaware of him at first. Her hair was pinned up, a few strands slipping loose as she read with the same quiet focus he remembered from long ago. For a brief second, he felt the years melt away. Then, as if sensing him, she glanced up. She stilled. Her fingers pressed lightly into the pages, her expression unreadable. He stepped forward, waiting for her to speak first. It took a beat longer than expected, But then she let out a breath, shutting the book with a deliberate snap. Well, I can't say I had this on my bingo card. Romeo took another step. Charlie. She leaned against the counter, folding her arms in a way that told him she was already bracing for whatever conversation was about to happen. So, what's the occasion? Thought you'd stop by, maybe sign a few books? He ignored the dig. I ran into your daughter yesterday. She gave a slow nod, like she had been expecting this. Lily has a habit of making first impressions. She told me I forgot you in my book. Charlie lifted a brow. And did you? His jaw tightened. She seemed to think so. A smile flickered at the corner of her lips, but it wasn't amusement. More like something weighing on her, something old and unresolved. Romeo exhaled sharply. How old is she? She tilted her head considering him, then let out a laugh. A genuine, from-the-stomach kind of laugh. Oh, Romeo. Not everything is about you. His stomach twisted. So she's not, no, she said, still smiling, but there was something else behind it now. She's not yours. He should have felt relieved. But instead, there was a strange, unexpected weight in his chest, something that had nothing to do with paternity. Then why did she come to me? Charlie's expression softened slightly, though she didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned, grabbed a notepad from behind the counter, and started scribbling something down. She's 7, she said, voice more even now. She's smart, too smart for her own good sometimes. And she's got a thing for stories. Especially the ones that aren't finished. Romeo frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Charlie tore the paper from the pad, folded it, and slid it across the counter. It means, if you really want answers, you should probably ask her yourself. He hesitated before taking it, unfolding the paper to find an address. Charlie held his gaze for a moment longer before picking up her book again, flipping to the page she had been on before he walked in. It was a dismissal. Romeo knew when he was being shut out. Still, he lingered for a moment, watching her as she returned to her reading like he had never stepped through the door at all. Then, finally, he turned and walked out. Back in the car, he stared at the address in his hands. He had walked away from her once, convinced that success was the only thing that mattered. But now, he couldn't shake the feeling that this story, whatever it was far from over. Romeo sat in his car outside the address Charlie had given him. A small house, modest but well-kept, with potted plants lining the steps and a red bicycle leaning against the porch. The curtains in the front window shifted slightly, and he caught the quick movement of a small figure before the fabric dropped back into place. He wasn't sure if he had ever felt hesitant knocking on someone's door before. There was always a certainty in what came next. A contract to be signed, a deal to be made, an outcome that had been calculated before he even stepped inside. But this was different. He had barely raised his fist to knock before the door swung open, and there she was. Lily Monroe, standing in the doorway like she had been expecting him. She wore a serious expression, arms crossed, studying him with a sharpness far beyond her years. He almost laughed at how much she resembled Charlie in that moment. "You came," she said, like she wasn't entirely convinced he would. Romeo slipped his hands into his pockets. "I did." Lily squinted at him, then stepped aside, motioning him in like she was the one in charge. The inside of the house was warm and lived in. Books stacked in odd places, drawings pinned to the fridge, a faint smell of vanilla and something freshly baked lingering in the air. It was a stark contrast to his own sleek, impersonal penthouse, all glass and steel and perfectly curated design. Lily climbed onto a bar stool at the kitchen counter, watching him expectantly. "So, what do you want to know?" He leaned against the counter across from her, mirroring her casual stance. "Why do you think your mom should be in my book?" She tilted her head, considering him like she was debating whether or not to share a trade secret. "Because you left out the most important part." "And what part is that?" "The part where you were human." Romeo let out a short breath, shaking his head. "I don't even know what that means." Lily rolled her eyes in a way that made it clear she had little patience for adults who didn't keep up. Your book is all about winning. Climbing. How you work so hard to get where you are. But it's missing the part where you fell. His jaw tightened slightly. I didn't fall. Lily raised an eyebrow. That's not what Mom says. He should have seen that coming. He sat in the silence that stretched between them, letting her words settle uncomfortably in his chest. He had built his entire career on control. He dictated the narrative, shaped the version of himself the world got to see. But here was this child, poking holes in the armor he had spent years reinforcing, casually dismantling the version of himself he had put to print. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling through his nose. So, what exactly did your mom say about me? Lily swung her legs beneath the bar stool, thinking. She said you used to be a person before you became a businessman. That one landed deeper than he cared to admit. And what does that mean? Lily shrugged. I dunno. Maybe you should ask her. He had, and she had given him a name and a closed door. But Lily wasn't finished. She slid off the bar stool, wandered over to a bookshelf crammed with old hardcovers and paperbacks, and pulled out a small, battered notebook. She held it out to him. She used to write stuff down a lot. Before. Before what, he wasn't sure. He took the notebook, flipping it open to a page filled with familiar handwriting. The date at the top made his pulse tick a little faster. It was from years ago, back when he had been clawing his way up, too focused on what was ahead to look at what he was leaving behind. The words blurred for a moment before he forced himself to focus. You can love someone and still let them go. Doesn't mean it won't hurt. Doesn't mean you won't look back. He closed the notebook carefully, setting it on the counter. She kept a lot of these? Lily nodded. She used to write a lot about you. Then she stopped. He had nothing to say to that. Instead, he watched as Lily hopped back onto the stool and cracked open his book, flipping through the pages like she was checking for errors. Did you even read this after you wrote it? Romeo sighed. Of course I did. Then why didn't you put the real stuff in? He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. You ask a lot of questions. Lily grinned. Mom says curiosity is the best trait a person can have. Something about the way she said it made him pause. It wasn't just a line Charlie had fed her, she believed it, carried it in the way she moved through the world. She wasn't just some kid digging for attention. She was searching for something real. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to give it to her. Over the next few days, he found himself coming back. Lily had no shortage of opinions about his book, pointing out moments where he had conveniently skipped over things, calling out parts that felt too polished. You wrote about how hard it was in the beginning, she said one afternoon, flipping through a section about his early failures. But you didn't write about who helped you. You didn't write about my mom. He exhaled slowly, fingers drumming against the table. Your mom doesn't need to be in the book. Lily narrowed her eyes. She was there. She was. He wouldn't deny that. But it's my story. She snapped the book shut. It's not the whole story. He didn't have an answer for that. The media, however, had plenty. The more time he spent with Lily, the more questions surfaced. Photos of him outside the bookstore circulated, accompanied by speculative headlines. His board was nervous. His PR team was on edge. Was there a scandal? An affair? A secret child? They wanted him to make a statement, to distance himself before things spun out of control. But Romeo wasn't sure he wanted to. He found Charlie at the bookstore one evening, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. You're making headlines, she said. Not my fault, people have nothing better to talk about. Charlie smirked. You showing up here every other day probably isn't helping. He didn't deny it. He studied her for a moment before asking, why is Lily so determined to be in my life? Charlie's expression shifted, the teasing edge fading into something quieter. She hesitated, then let out a slow breath. Because, Romeo, she thinks you need us. The words settled deep, rattling something he hadn't realized had been hollow for years. He had always believed that success was about what you built, what you achieved. But standing there, looking at Charlie, remembering the years he had buried beneath ambition, he wondered if maybe Lily had been right all along. Maybe the part he left out wasn't just about Charlie. Maybe it was about the person he used to be. Romeo hadn't stopped thinking about what Charlie had said. Because, Romeo, she thinks you need us. The words had followed him home, settling into the quiet corners of his mind, refusing to leave. He had spent years convincing himself that he didn't need anyone, that the sacrifices he made were justified, that success was the only thing that mattered. But now, with Charlie and Lily back in his orbit, he wasn't so sure anymore. He found himself spending more time at the bookstore, not just for Lily but for Charlie too. It wasn't something he had planned or even acknowledged fully, he just kept showing up. Sometimes he browsed, pretending he was looking for a book, though he never bought one. Other times he just sat with Lily while she quizzed him on his own life, poking holes in his version of the past. One afternoon, after Charlie finished closing up, Lily tugged on Romeo's sleeve and declared, "We're going to the diner. You're coming." Charlie gave her a look, but Lily was already grabbing her coat. Romeo glanced at Charlie. "The diner?" Charlie sighed, pulling on her jacket. "You really don't remember, do you?" He did, the moment they stepped inside. It was the same place they used to go back when money was tight, when splitting a plate of fries was all they could afford. The walls were still lined with old photos, the booths still worn from years of customers sliding in and out. The same jukebox sat in the corner, still playing the kind of songs that made you feel nostalgic even if you didn't recognize them. Charlie slid into the booth across from him, and for a brief moment, it felt like nothing had changed. "You made a promise here once," she said, picking at the corner of a napkin. He leaned back. "Did I?" She nodded, her expression unreadable. "You said success wouldn't mean anything if you had no one to share it with." He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came. He didn't remember saying it, but it sounded like something the old version of him would have believed. The problem was, that version of him had disappeared the moment he decided that Charlie wasn't part of the future he was building. Lily, oblivious to the weight of the moment, was too busy dipping her fries in ketchup, but Romeo couldn't shake the way Charlie's words settled inside him. He thought about them even more when he got back to his office later that night. The sleek, pristine space was a testament to everything he had built. Everything he had sacrificed for. And yet, for the first time, it felt strangely hollow. He walked over to his desk and picked up a copy of his book. The Calloway Legacy. The title felt arrogant now. Like a monument to a man who had convinced himself he was the only one who mattered in his own story. A rustling sound made him pause. He turned to find a small figure hunched over his desk, tiny hands gripping a red crayon. Lily. Noah stood in the doorway, looking way too pleased with himself. "Told security she was your VIP guest." "You're welcome." Romeo sighed, walking over. "What exactly are you doing?" Lily grinned, holding up the page she had been working on. "Fixing your book." He took it from her, glancing down at the chaotic mess of scribbles and corrections. Some words were crossed out entirely, replaced with brutally honest edits in childish handwriting. Other sections had doodles in the margins, stick figures labeled Charlie, and Romeo, standing next to what looked like a tiny bookstore. "This is thorough," he muttered. Lily beamed. "I made a new chapter for you. The real one." He flipped to the back of the book, where she had added an entire page of crayon-scrawled text. Romeo Calloway didn't do it alone. He had help. From people who believed in him even when he didn't. And maybe he forgot, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Romeo stared at it for a long moment, something uncomfortable pressing at his chest. She had taken the thing he had spent years shaping and told the truth. Not the version people wanted, but the version that mattered. "You really don't like the book, do you?" he asked finally. Lily shrugged. "I like stories that are honest." He set the book down, swallowing the lump in his throat. The next morning, he woke up to his name plastered all over the internet. CEO's secret family? Romeo Calloway's hidden past exposed. There were pictures. Paparazzi shots of him outside the bookstore, at the diner, with Lily. Articles speculating about his connection to them, implying hidden affairs and abandoned children. The headlines twisted the truth into something ugly, something cheap. Charlie wasn't answering her phone. By the time he got to the bookstore, the sign on the door read closed. She opened it anyway, but the look on her face told him he wasn't welcome. "Charlie, did you leak it?" He took a step back. "What?" "The story," she said, arms crossed tightly. "Did you sell this to the press?" The accusation stung. "You really think I would do that? I think you're a businessman who knows how to control a narrative." He exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. "Charlie, I didn't." She shook her head, cutting him off. "I told you to stay away. I told you not to pull us into your world." Romeo had spent his entire career talking his way out of situations, but this wasn't a boardroom, and Charlie wasn't someone he could win over with logic. "Lily trusts you," she said finally, voice quieter now. "That's the part one can't forgive." He swallowed hard. "Charlie, I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "But it did," she said simply. And just like that, she shut the door. Romeo stood there for a long time, staring at the closed sign, the reality of it sinking in. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to win. He just wanted to do the right thing. Romeo stood outside the bookstore long after Charlie had shut the door in his face. The air felt heavy, the quiet of the street pressing in on him. He could have walked away. That's what he had always done, moved forward, left things behind. But this time, he wasn't sure if forward even existed without fixing what he had broken. The headlines wouldn't die down. Every news outlet had a take on the so-called secret family scandal. Speculation ran wild, ranging from dramatic love triangles to illegitimate children, none of it remotely close to the truth. The board was furious, the PR team scrambling. Romeo had given them nothing, refusing to deny or confirm anything. He let them spiral while he sat at his desk, staring at a blank page, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The book needed to change. For years he had told himself that his version of the past was the only one that mattered. That people wanted inspiration, not complications. But the more time he spent with Lily, the more he realized that wasn't true. People didn't just want success stories, they wanted the messy parts, the failures, the parts that made it real. He had stripped those away, convinced they were weaknesses, but now, all he could think about was that little girl looking up at him, so sure that he needed to fix his story. And maybe she was right. The next morning, Romeo walked into a conference room filled with his legal team, PR reps, and the board, all waiting for him to explain how he planned to handle the fallout. He tossed a manuscript onto the table. "I'm releasing a new edition," he said. His PR director, a polished woman who had built her career on keeping men like him out of trouble, blinked. "Excuse me?" "The book," he clarified. "I'm rewriting it." Murmurs spread across the table. His head of marketing shook his head. "Romeo, the book is already a bestseller. Why reopen the wound?" "Because I left something out." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "And I'm putting it back in." His legal team looked wary. "And what exactly are you planning to include?" "The truth." The room went silent. His PR director sighed, already exhausted. "We can spin this. We can reframe the narrative without reopening the book." "I don't want to reframe it." His marketing director frowned. "Romeo, do you know what this will do to your reputation?" He exhaled, running a hand over his face. "That's the thing. I don't care." That was when he knew he had already made his decision. The announcement went live that afternoon. The new edition of the Calloway Legacy, with a chapter dedicated to Charlie Monroe and the truth he had left out. He called it the Forgotten Chapter. It was as if the world had been waiting for him to say it. The media exploded, interviews flooded in, every outlet analyzing what it meant. Why had he left her out before? What had changed? People dissected every word of his statement. But the only person whose reaction he cared about hadn't said a thing. Charlie didn't call. Didn't text. So he went to her. When he walked into the bookstore, she was at the register, flipping through a book, pretending not to notice him. He cleared his throat, waiting for her to look up. She didn't. Charlie. She turned a page unmoved. What do you want, Romeo? He hesitated, then set a copy of the new edition on the counter between them. She stared at it for a long moment before finally meeting his gaze. You actually did it, she said, voice quiet. I told you I would. She studied him, something flickering behind her expression, something he couldn't place. She didn't reach for the book, but she didn't shove it away either. That was something, at least. I didn't do it for the media, he said after a moment. Or for damage control. I did it because it was the truth. And because Lily deserved to know that you mattered. Charlie exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing over the cover. Before she could say anything, a small voice from behind the shelves called. Mom, did he fix it? Lily appeared, arms crossed, watching him like she had been waiting for this exact moment. Charlie hesitated, then pushed the book toward her daughter. See for yourself. Lily flipped through the pages quickly, stopping when she reached the new chapter. She read the first few lines, then looked up at Romeo, eyes wide with delight. You actually fixed it, she said, grinning. He smiled, something warm settling in his chest. You said it needed to be fixed. She nodded, then turned to Charlie. Mom, we should keep him. Charlie groaned. Lily. What? He learned his lesson. Charlie let out a breath, shaking her head. You're impossible. Lily just shrugged, like she knew she had already won. Something shifted after that. The ice between him and Charlie didn't melt overnight, but it softened. He kept coming back, finding excuses to stop by. At first, Charlie pretended not to notice. But she didn't tell him to leave either. He started spending more time with Lily, too. It wasn't something he had planned, she just had a way of making it impossible not to. One night, she sat next to him at the bookstore, flipping through an old magazine. You always look lonely in pictures, she said. He glanced at her, brows furrowing. What? She tapped a photo of him on a business cover, perfectly posed, every detail carefully curated. Mom always says you built an empire. But I think you built a castle with no one in it. His breath caught for just a second. Lily shrugged, flipping the page. That's why I wanted you to fix the book. You should have family in your story. He swallowed, throat tight. He didn't have an answer for that. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he needed one. Romeo had always measured his life in milestones. His first million, his first company acquisition, the moment the Callaway legacy hit the bestseller list. Each one had been a stepping stone, a marker of success, something to chase, something to conquer. But lately, the way he measured time had started to shift. Now, it wasn't about board meetings or press conferences. It was about moments. Like the first time Lily dragged him into the bookstore's back room to force him into a storytime session, insisting that even CEOs needed to read something other than financial reports. Or the way Charlie had started softening, little by little, until she no longer looked at him like a man she regretted knowing. Even Noah had noticed, smirking every time Romeo ditched a meeting early or answered a call with a slight smile instead of his usual clipped tone. You're becoming a family man, Noah had teased one afternoon as they wrapped up a conference call. Romeo had brushed it off at the time, but now, as he stood in front of the mirror adjusting his cufflinks, he couldn't deny it. The difference was there, undeniable, in the way his shoulders felt lighter, the way his mind wasn't always consumed by what came next. Tonight was important. For years he had built walls between himself and anything personal, keeping his world neatly separated. But now, he wanted to bring them together. He wanted Charlie and Lily in his world, not as a secret, not as something the media speculated about, but as people who mattered. The gala was one of the biggest events of the year, a high-profile charity fundraiser where every major industry leader would be. He had never cared much for these events beyond their business advantages, but this time, it was different. Lily was ecstatic. When he arrived at Charlie's house to pick them up, she burst out the door wearing a navy blue dress with a glittery skirt that spun when she twirled. Around her neck was a delicate gold necklace, a small pendant engraved with the word family, a gift he had given her earlier that day. "You look like a princess," Romeo told her, watching as she grinned, spinning in a slow circle to make the skirt ripple. "I know," she said confidently, grabbing his hand. "Come on, we're gonna be late." Charlie stepped out behind her, adjusting an earring. The sight of her made him pause. She had always been beautiful, but tonight she looked different. Like a version of herself he hadn't seen in a long time, one who wasn't weighed down by the past or the bookstore or the sharp edges that had kept him at a distance. "Don't stare," she murmured as she passed him, a small smirk playing at her lips. "I wasn't." She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. The night felt right in a way that surprised him. It wasn't just that they were there, or that Lily was beaming as she greeted people like she had been attending galas her whole life. It was the way Charlie and Romeo fell into easy conversation, the way she rolled her eyes at the pomp and spectacle but stayed close, the way Lily kept tugging at his sleeve to introduce him to someone new. During dinner, Lily leaned in and whispered, "Mom says you used to be terrible at dancing." Charlie, overhearing, smirked. "Still is." Romeo raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold assumption." Lily crossed her arms. "Prove it." He sighed but stood, extending a hand toward Charlie. "Well?" She hesitated, then took it, allowing him to pull her onto the dance floor. For a moment, it was like stepping back in time. They had done this before, back in their early days, before everything had gone wrong. She had always teased him for being too stiff, too focused, and yet somehow, they had always fit together. "You're still leading like you have a board meeting to get to," she muttered. He huffed a quiet laugh. "And you're still pretending you don't love it." Her lips parted slightly, but whatever she was about to say was lost as Lily suddenly appeared at the edge of the dance floor, waving wildly. "My turn!" Romeo barely had time to react before Lily grabbed his hand, dragging him into an exaggerated spin. Charlie stepped back, watching with amusement as Lily took over, directing his movements like she was the one leading. He had never laughed this much at one of these events. By the end of the night, when they finally stepped outside into the cool evening air, Romeo felt something settle inside him. He had spent years chasing more. But tonight, for the first time, he felt like he already had enough. Lily reached for his hand, still clutching the tiny silver clutch she had insisted on bringing. "That was the best night ever," she declared. Romeo smiled, squeezing her fingers lightly. "Yeah, it really was." Then the world changed. It happened too fast. A screech of tires. The distant blare of a horn. A sudden blur of movement from the corner of his vision. Then Lily. He turned just in time to see her, small and delicate, standing at the edge of the curb as a car barreled forward, headlights too bright against the darkness. He moved. Everything felt slow and too fast at the same time. His feet left the ground, his arms reached out, but he was too far, too far, too far, too far. A scream. The impact was deafening. The sound of metal against flesh, the dull thud of a body hitting pavement, the sharp, choked cry of Charlie's voice cutting through the chaos. Romeo was already running. People were shouting. Someone was calling for an ambulance. His mind barely registered any of it. All he saw was the small, still body lying in the street. Lily. Her dress was crumpled, the glittering skirt darkened with something that shouldn't be there. Her tiny gold necklace, the one he had given her just hours ago, was twisted slightly, the chain glinting under the streetlights. He fell to his knees beside her, hands shaking as he reached out. "Lily?" She didn't answer. Charlie was next to him in an instant, hands pressed against Lily's shoulders, voice frantic as she whispered her name over and over like she could will her awake. Romeo pressed his fingers to her pulse, searching, pleading, a faint beat. Still there. Barely. The ambulance arrived, sirens splitting the night, red lights flashing across the pavement. Hands pulled him back as paramedics took over, voices giving rapid instructions. But all he could focus on was Lily, and the way her hand dangled limply at her side, her fingers smudged with faint traces of red. Charlie was shaking. Romeo reached for her, and this time, she didn't push him away. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Then they were gone. Romeo had experienced loss before. Failed deals, business ventures that collapsed, partnerships that soured. He had always seen them as obstacles, things to overcome, lessons to learn from. But this wasn't something to be fixed. This wasn't something that could be salvaged with the right strategy or damage control. Lily was gone. The funeral was small, quiet. Charlie didn't want a spectacle, no press, no condolences from strangers who had never known her daughter. Just a handful of people who had been a part of Lily's short life. The bookstore staff. A couple of teachers. Some neighbors. Romeo wasn't sure if he was supposed to be there, but he went anyway. He couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Charlie sat in the front, silent, staring ahead. Her hands were clasped together in her lap, but she never moved, never spoke. She barely blinked. Romeo had seen grief before, but not like this. When it was over, people filtered out, offering hushed condolences. Romeo stayed back, watching as Charlie stood by the small framed picture of Lily, her fingers brushing over the edge of the glass. She didn't turn when she spoke. "She loved you so much." His throat tightened. "She thought you'd never let anything bad happen." Romeo had no response to that. Charlie exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "I should have held her hand." He closed his eyes, a sharp pain twisting through him. "I should have." It was the first time either of them had acknowledged what was eating them alive. The what-ifs. The relentless, agonizing loop of if-onlys. If he had walked on the other side. If they had left 5 minutes earlier. If he had been faster. It didn't matter. The ending was the same. Charlie didn't push him away, but she didn't look at him either. She had nothing left to give, and he understood that. Romeo stopped going into the office. Noah called a few times, first with concern, then with frustration. He ignored him. The company didn't matter. The meetings, the deals, the perfectly curated world he had built, it all felt meaningless. He found himself at Charlie's house more often than not. Not inside. Just there. Sitting on the porch, sometimes in his car, not expecting anything, just unable to be anywhere else. Charlie never told him to leave, but she never invited him in either. She existed in her grief, and he let her, knowing he couldn't fix this for her, knowing nothing could. Lily's room was exactly as she had left it. He had stepped inside once, expecting it to feel empty, but it didn't. It was filled with her. Books stacked haphazardly on the shelf, crayon drawings pinned to the wall, a small stuffed bear sitting upright on the bed like it was waiting for her to come back. Romeo sat on the floor, letting his back rest against the bed frame. He picked up a book from her nightstand, flipping through the pages, but he wasn't really reading. His fingers found a loose sheet of paper, folded in half, tucked between the pages. He opened it. It was from her version of his book. The one she had rewritten in his office with crayons and absolute certainty that she had gotten it right. Romeo Calloway didn't do it alone. He had help. From people who believed in him even when he didn't. And maybe he forgot, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. His hands clenched the paper tightly, his breath unsteady. She had wanted to be part of his story. Not for herself, but for him. Because she had seen something he hadn't. He swallowed hard, staring at the words, at the uneven handwriting, at the little heart she had drawn in the corner. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I still need to finish it." Romeo had always believed time healed everything. That was what people said, wasn't it? That pain dulled with the months, that wounds closed if you gave them long enough. But months passed, and the pain didn't fade. It settled. It became part of him, something he carried, something that would never leave. He stopped waiting for it to go away. Instead, he focused on the only thing that felt right. He rewrote the book. It wasn't easy. Some days, the words came effortlessly, spilling onto the page like they had been waiting to be told. Other days, he stared at the screen for hours, unable to put into words what had been lost. But he kept going. Because Lily would have wanted him to. Noah had been the first to notice the shift. "So," he had said one afternoon, leaning against Romeo's office door, arms crossed. "You finally rewriting history the right way?" Romeo just nodded. When the manuscript was done, he turned it in without a second thought. No press meetings, no carefully crafted statements. Just the pages that needed to be told. The new edition of the Calloway Legacy released 3 months later. It was different this time. The success didn't matter. The numbers didn't matter. The headlines speculated over why he had rewritten it, why he had included her, why a man known for being calculated had suddenly decided to let the world see something real. But Romeo ignored all of it. Because the only person whose opinion mattered was the one who would never get to read it. And the only other person who deserved to was the one who had been there from the start. The bookstore looked the same as always. It still smelled of old paper and cinnamon, still had books stacked in uneven piles, still felt like a place where time moved differently. Charlie stood behind the counter, flipping through something, not yet looking up. He placed a copy of the book on the counter. She stilled. Slowly, she closed the book she had been holding and rested her hands on the counter, fingers brushing over the edges of the new edition. Her gaze moved to the title, then to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Romeo exhaled. She would have loved it. Charlie swallowed, blinking against the sting of tears she hadn't expected. She ran a hand over the cover, then traced the gold lettering of the last chapter title. The Forgotten Chapter. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She would have loved you. Romeo's breath itched. Charlie stepped around the counter, hesitating for just a second before she closed the distance between them. For the first time since the accident, they held each other. The grief didn't disappear. It never would. But it no longer felt like something they had to carry alone. Time passed, but this time, Romeo didn't let it slip away. He became a part of Charlie's life in the quiet ways. He fixed the broken shelf in the bookstore that she had been meaning to get to. He picked up coffee on slow mornings when neither of them wanted to talk but didn't want to be alone. He learned which books she would set aside for him before he even knew he wanted them. There were no grand declarations, no sudden revelations. Just two people finding their way through something neither of them had ever wanted to survive. And one morning, months later, when Charlie absent-mindedly set an extra coffee on the counter with his name on it before he had even walked in, Romeo realized he had never really been looking for success. He had been looking for this. The last thing he had left to do was finish what he had started. Lily's headstone was smooth under his fingertips, the carved letters standing sharp against the sunlight filtering through the trees. He set the book down beside it, letting the soft breeze ruffle the pages before resting his hand over the cover. I finished our book. A golden ray of sunlight broke through the branches, warming the book's surface, making the gold lettering shine. And for the first time in his life, Romeo Calloway didn't feel alone. Romeo had never planned on writing a sequel, especially not to something as personal as the new edition of his autobiography. But as days turned into weeks and then months, he realized that life had a way of continuing no matter how deep the scars ran. The memory of Lily never faded. He still felt the gentle tug at the edges of his mind whenever he passed a toy store or heard a child's laughter, the sense that she should be there, a small hand in his, pointing excitedly at some new discovery. The ache dulled to a familiar throb rather than the sharp twist that had once taken his breath away, but it stayed with him, a quiet reminder of what he had lost and what he had found in the process. He and Charlie spent more time together, though there was no sudden declaration of romance or any attempt to fill the void Lily left behind. Instead, they found solace in small routines that soothed the ache of absence. On Tuesdays, they restocked new arrivals at the bookstore, sharing silent companionship behind the dusty shelves, occasionally pausing to exchange a look that said more than any words could. On Thursdays, Romeo tended to the corner garden outside, the one Charlie had always been too busy to maintain, planting seedlings and herbs that he insisted would help business. Sometimes he'd catch her looking at him through the glass, expression steady, as if she still couldn't quite believe he was there. Friday nights often found them sharing takeout in the cramped office at the back of the bookstore, both too exhausted to talk about anything serious, content with the muted hum of the city around them. Little by little, they carved out spaces for each other, no formal arrangement, no label, just a shared understanding that neither wanted to be alone in that dark place grief had created. One Saturday afternoon, a small boy wandered into the store, eyes wandering over the shelves until he found a corner filled with children's books that had once been Lily's favorite spot. Romeo noticed him from the next aisle, noting how hesitant he seemed, as if unsure he had the right to settle there. Charlie saw him too, pausing in the middle of pricing a stack of classics. The two of them exchanged a glance before Romeo took a step forward, lowering himself to one knee beside the child. He asked if the boy needed help finding something, voice low and calm, no trace of impatience. The child mumbled something about waiting for his mother, who was outside on the phone. Romeo nodded and handed him a picture book about dragons, remembering how Lily used to shove those very pages under his nose, demanding that he read the funny parts out loud. The boy brightened, flipping through the colorful images. A few minutes later, his mother came in, apologizing for the trouble, but Romeo merely smiled and waved away her concern. When the boy left, clutching that book to his chest, Romeo felt something shift in the air, a little beam of warmth that somehow traveled between him and Charlie. She left her spot at the counter and joined him in the children's section, kneeling where the boy had been, running her fingers over the spines of the books that Lily once adored. Her breathing was a bit uneven, but she didn't cry, and he placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, either of them saying anything. They stayed like that for a while, letting the moment soften the jagged edges of their shared grief. Later that week, Romeo received a series of invitations to speak at conferences about the revised edition of his autobiography, requests from businesses and schools eager to hear the story behind his transformation. For a time, he ignored them, uncertain whether reliving that narrative in front of strangers was something he could do without fracturing all over again. But one invitation stood out, a small event for young entrepreneurs in a community center that housed an after-school program. He thought of Lily, how she had believed in truth, in owning the messy parts of life, and he decided to accept. The day he arrived, the room was packed with hopeful faces, some still in college, a few older, but all brimming with the same hunger for success he had once possessed. He spoke about building a company, about mistakes, about losing sight of what mattered. He told them about the book he had rewritten, and how he had once thought achievements were enough, only to learn that they weren't. The questions poured in afterward, but they weren't about stock options or global expansions. They were about choices and regret, and how to find meaning in what they did. He answered with honesty, thinking of Lily, thinking of how she had forced him to rewrite his life story the same way she had scribbled in those margins with her crayons. When he returned to the bookstore that evening, Charlie was waiting by the register, flipping the sign from open to closed. He could see the curiosity in her expression, the subtle question about how it had gone. He told her in a quiet voice that it had been harder than he expected, but somehow freeing. She nodded, and they closed up in silence, walking side by side to her door, where he paused, wondering if he should say goodnight. She surprised him by inviting him in for tea. Neither mentioned Lily's name directly that night, but her presence was there, in the way they both gravitated toward the small table in the living room where Lily had once sat coloring pictures of dragons, in the careful way they spoke about the future, as if it could hold both sorrow and hope at the same time. They talked about small plans for the bookstore, about possibly expanding the children's section, about adding a corner dedicated to literacy programs. The idea brought a flicker of warmth to Charlie's eyes, one that Romeo recognized as cautious optimism. They agreed that it might be a good way to honor Lily's love of reading without turning it into a shrine. In the weeks that followed, Romeo found himself more involved in Charlie's world than he had ever been, even back when they were young and in love. He learned how to do inventory, how to recommend books, how to deal with a leaky roof on a rainy day without calling in a construction crew, because sometimes it was enough to patch things up with your own two hands. The bookstore became a reflection of them both, filled with quiet corners and bits of shared memories, including those that hurt. Charlie began sorting through Lily's possessions, deciding which ones to keep and which to donate. Romeo assisted, though he never touched Lily's personal drawings without asking, always afraid he'd do something wrong. Sometimes, Charlie would pause over a teddy bear or a battered notebook and hold it close for a moment, but she never slipped back into complete despair. He was there, and they were learning how to stand again, even with the weight of loss pressing on their shoulders. One afternoon, a package arrived addressed to Charlie. She opened it to find dozens of letters from readers who had discovered the new edition of Romeo's book. Most were full of sympathy, sharing how they had lost loved ones, how they appreciated the honesty. A few were from parents whose children had asked about Lily, wanting to know more about the little girl who had changed a billionaire's heart. Charlie read them quietly, sometimes letting a faint tremor pass through her, but she never broke down. Instead, One chilly autumn evening, Romeo walked to the cemetery alone, carrying a small potted plant with bright purple flowers he thought Lily might have liked. He set it gently beside the headstone, resting his hand on the cool surface. He stood there for a while, thinking of all the things he'd wanted to show her, the places he'd hoped to take her, the stories they would never read together. After a few moments, he straightened, letting a calm exhale pass through him. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could let her memory live on by how he chose to move forward. When he got back to the bookstore, Charlie was sitting outside on the steps, a mug of tea in her hands, as if waiting for him. He settled beside her, shoulders brushing, and she slipped her hand through the crook of his arm without a word. They gazed out at the street, watching headlights flicker by and leaves drift across the pavement. Neither spoke of Lily right then, but they felt her presence in the quiet sense of understanding between them. This was their life now, marked by loss but also shaped by a shared strength. Over time, the place that Lily had left behind became something they filled together, not forgetting her or trying to move on as though she had never existed, but learning to carry her with them. It wasn't a victory, not in any sense that Romeo had ever recognized, but it was something else, something truer. And if Lily were there, she'd smile and say that was the story that mattered, not the ending he once wrote for himself, but the one he found when he finally opened his heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps out the channel. And if you want more heartwarming and emotional stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this one. I'd love to hear your reactions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.